If I ask someone what is yoga, they probably think of the postures, the plastic yoga mats, the Lululemon pants, and just some type of fitness trend for stretching. But this is a twisted, regurgitated take upon what America has twisted the technology of yoga to be. And so what I want to do in this video is break down the 8 limbs of yoga, a great framework that really breaks down what yoga is through the lens of meditation. So what is yoga? Well, for starters, the translation is unity. It comes from Sanskrit, and the root of the word comes from yoke, which means to unify or to weave together. And so when someone is a yogi, it really is referring to their perceived unification of reality, of seeing everything as unified and not separate. And so the technology of yoga is to create more unity in your experience. This is not a religion, but a technology. So oftentimes, especially in the Western world, people confuse yoga for some sort of religion rather than a technology or a science, as yoga has been found in all traditions across all religions and cultures, as it's really found within. If you really truly cleanse the mind and really go deep within yourselves, yoga will always appear. This is because this is not some type of dogma, but this is just understanding the technology of the avatar of the body. And so the modern world creates a lot of traps to what yoga truly is. You know, like I was referring to, many people think of it as some type of fitness or stretching. They have the plastic clothes, the plastic yoga mats, you know, this whole type of culture moving in this weird direction, just trying to make a lot of money. Yeah, maybe the postures does make you more flexible. Maybe it does help a little bit with your mind. Of course, this is part of yoga. This is not something separate, but this is really a surface level understanding of what truly yoga is. So first, I want to really understand what is the origins of yoga before we dive into the framework. So from the traditions from India, they say Adi Yogi was the first yogi, who appeared in the upper Himalayas around 15,000 plus years ago, when he first entered samadhi and unified with the universe. This is when he had the understanding of yoga. Archaeologically, there's evidence of yoga being found 5,000 years ago in India, with some scholars arguing over 10,000 years ago. But really, it's just one unified science. It is within the body, and it is expressed across every tradition. We might be talking about yoga through the lens of India a lot because this is how it's been pushed and the frameworks of yoga has really been developed. But if you look at other sciences like Qigong, for example, you find yoga, these technologies, these asanas, these understandings through their lens. And so really understand, like Adi Yogi, once you truly go deep within yourself, you become unified through what we will describe later, samadhi, and really truly start to understand from the inside out, rather from the external to the internal. And so the origins of the limbs, this framework that we're about to dive into, comes from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. This is the 8 living limbs of consciousness, which brings someone from ignorance to liberation. So you can kind of see this as not only a way of living and using the technology of yoga, but how you can get from suffering to enlightenment, as these are step-by-step ways in which you approach more freedom in your experience, more unity. So Ashtanga, the 8 limbs, is really just a synthesis of the royal path, the Raja Yoga, one of the 4 ways in which yoga can really be pursued. So Patanjali's really synthesized this in a very well articulated way through the 8 limbs of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So let's get into it. Yama, the first limb. So for the first 2 limbs, I like to say they also have the 5 fingers, as they each will have 5 distinct aspects to these limbs in which you can further study and develop yourself. So yama is really about ethical restraint, guidelines for interacting with the world and others. The more you dive into this, the more you see this throughout all of the religious and spiritual teachings, especially people like Jesus. For starters, the first finger of this limb is hamissa, non-violence. To harm the external is the act from the internal delusion. This is truly understanding that we are living in a hall of mirrors. Everything that you are experiencing in the external world is really a reflection of your internal frequency, your internal being. And so participating in nonviolence is to really have no violence, no internal war within our reality, within ourselves. If you're still conflicting with yourself, if you're still battling with reality inside the mind, inside the body, then you will act violently externally. The second finger is satya, truthfulness, becoming the living mirror and not just speaking of it. This is a huge one, and one I feel like most people, especially in the spiritual community, often overlook. It's not about speaking all these frameworks, all these truths, all these realizations, but embodying it. The more you can embody it, the more you actually cleanse the body and create this freedom within your internal experience. The more you're a living mirror, the more you are a light for the rest of the world. This is so much more important than being able to talk the talk, but it is about walking the walk. Can you walk with integrity of the truth? It's way more important than talking the truth. There's so many wolves in sheep clothing. People who are saying a lot of the right things, but doing the wrong action. And you can really only understand a tree by its fruit, by the action in which someone is taking. The third finger is asteya, the non-stealing, the perception of abundance. This is really understanding that in true reality, everything is abundant. I mean, just look at nature. You can see that abundance is so clear. The amount of growth, the amount of expansionness, the vastness that nature provides is unrivaled to the scarcity mindset that we like to pretend we're in. And so this non-stealing aspect is understanding that you're always in relationship to everything and that you're always in abundance. And so that you're not actually needing to take anything from scarcity, but always acting out of a relationship to something, always giving and receiving. The fourth finger is brahmacharya, moderation or right use of energy, refinement. One of the easiest ways for many people to see this is that a lot of times people will run their mouths, especially when they've had some type of expansive experience. But to truly understand, you will realize that no words can really justify any of the experience. Only direct experience is really the best way to show someone, spirituality and all these type of experiences. But just think of it from a lens of a camera. When you are in a beautiful nature spot, when you take a picture with your camera, it cannot do it justice. And so learning to refine your energy so that you can operate more efficiently is a very important thing. For example, you're not taking a lot of photos of this nature, but finding the one part, the one point, the one angle, the one textures, the very specific way that really can help encapsulate what the journey of that nature spot is. And this can be said throughout all your experience. Learning to be refined with your energy in all sorts of ways is going to be very beneficial. This will help stop burnouts. This will help stop dark nights of the soul. This will help in so many ways, and I think is a very slept upon aspect of the spiritual path, and especially the 8 limbs. Yamas and niyamas, while being the foundation for the 8 limbs, are usually often overlooked. And then the final ones, and so the final finger for yama is aparigraha, non-attachment. This is a huge one, especially if you have studied any Buddhism. Non-attachment is a very large topic that we can go into for a long period of time, but it's truly just understanding that everything is borrowed from the infinite. The only thing that is permanent is change. So everything is really just impermanence. And so when we truly understand what non-attachment is and this understanding of impermanence of reality, then we can really start to find the middle path in which we want to operate in. So what is non-attachment truly? First of all, it's not being attached to the false natures and false beliefs that are created within the mind. So learning to see reality in the present moment, not through the thoughts, not through the stories that are made up, but seeing it as it truly is one step towards non-attachment. But it is also not being detached. So oftentimes people, when they're trying to become non-attached, they become detached from reality. So they start spiritually bypassing their emotions, even though emotions are just your energy and motion. So they are true, they are part of reality. And so to learn to be non-attached is to learn to respond to your environment rather than react. If you're still reacting to your environment, this can be fight, flight, or freeze. And a lot of times detachment becomes one of these things, and same with attachment. If you are in survival mode, you are going to want to be attached to your life. You're going to either want to freeze if you're having a lot of negative emotions that you don't want to feel. You might even try to fly away when you have so much attachment towards an outcome. For example, say you're in a relationship that is not working out, but you still have so much attachment to this relationship, even though both parties understand that this is not working out. You're going to start either detaching yourself or attaching even harder in the relationship. You're either going to be grasping way more for the other person in the relationship, or you're going to fly away. You're going to detach from the relationship, creating more separation rather than if you're not attached and seeing the relationship as it is. You'll understand when the relationship is no longer net beneficial, you would take the appropriate steps in reality to either remedy this fact, say it out loud, whether it be remedying the fact and creating a stronger connection of unity, or understanding that the paths are not meant to stay together forever. This is responding to reality through non-attachment. I can go on forever about non-attachment. This is one of the largest aspects of the spiritual path, is learning to be non-attached. This is finding the middle path, the path of life, as Jesus says. It's learning to stay in this non-attached state. This does not mean you're detaching yourself from reality. You're fully feeling everything. You're feeling all your emotions. You're feeling all the physical aspects of reality. You are so deeply intimate with your experience when you're not attached, because there is no illusion to your thought processes, to your experience. You are wielding the mind appropriately, and so you're in the present moment, and so the taste of food is so much more delicious. Your experiences with other people are way more intimate and energetic. The wind touching your skin will send you into ecstatic tears of bliss. This is where you're hitting non-attachment. Now let's move on to niyamas, personal observance. This is about internal disciplines for self-development. This is really talking about going inwards, introspection. Something that most of the modern world is missing is going into introspection. This is kind of complementary to yamas. And so at the bottom here, I say yama dissolves karma, but niyama refines dharma. So this is a very important aspect of this dual nature of these things. But like yamas, niyamas also have 5 fingers. And so we'll go through each of the fingers to really understand what the practice of personal observation really means. So the first finger is socha, cleanliness and purity, vibrational clarity so prana can flow freely. So this is really just understanding the purity of your internal environment. One of the analogies I always like to refer to is that you're kind of cleaning out the closet of your internal being. So thought processes that are running, false stories that you're being told, all these ideas that you've been programmed with through the ages, you kind of need to unlearn a lot of these processes so you can kind of be in that non-attached and present moment. This is what it means to have a purified energetic center, a purified vibrational standpoint. You kind of want to just be the most authentic self that you can be, and that means you must unlearn all the programs, unlearn all these things, or clean the closet. The second finger is satosha. This is contentment, the silent joy of the soul resting in the now. Contentment is not always the best word for this, because contentment is usually used as a way that you have sacrificed something just so that you are okay and not interrupted and not feeling disrupted in your experience. Rather, this is just understanding that the underlying aspect of everything is just the silent joy, is this unconditional love that reality really has. I mean, this can be understood that if you really look at reality, you can't name one thing that is separate from another. This is showing that reality, the universe, is really just all unified. It's all in relationship to something else itself. And so what this limb, this finger, is touching upon is this aspect that when you really go fully inwards and you unravel all these things and you find the point of unity with everything, you'll find this unconditional love, this joy, where you can sit anywheres and have full bliss and full joy. Everything in your experience is blissful. Everything in your experience will feel joyful, because this is the natural state, a childlike curiosity, this childlike play with the universe. The third finger to this limb is tapas, discipline or effort. This burns away the shadows of illusion. This is a very important one, to put in the discipline, the effort to burn away and dissolve these karmas. You really can't co-create anything in reality without actually repeatedly showing the universe that this is what you want to do. This is what you want to create. And same thing with personal observation. If you're only introspecting in very small occasions, like if you had a crazy experience that you're trying to integrate, or only when you're sitting on the mat do you introspect, and not in the everyday action, then you will quickly see that you'll quickly find out that life is not going to give you all these crazy experiences and things that you want to manifest, or crazy energetic expansions. But if you're constantly in an effort of discipline, of introspection, of personal observation, in a state of meditation, then you'll find all these other things about the eight limbs, like the contentment, like the cleanliness of authentic vibration, and all these other things that will come too with discipline and effort. Now, to touch upon this a little further, I would like to say that discipline is a very great tool, but a lot of times people are doing discipline out of some sort of sacrifice or some sort of negative scarcity mindset. Like they will continue to do something because of some sort of hate towards themselves, or this fear for something. Now, if you do it out of the more feminine side of discipline, devotion, you are doing everything out of love. And with true devotion, discipline becomes effortless. So where, as I was explaining tapas as discipline or effort, you really want to, balance this out with devotion, with bhakti yoga, which I'll explain later, so that it does become effortless effort, where you are having this crazy amount of discipline all through the lens of unconditional love, of devotion. Devotion to your life, devotion to your loved ones, devotion to whatever your dharma desires. Now, the fourth finger of this limb is svadhyaya. This is self-study, reflection, introspection. To know thyself is to see God studying God. So this is kind of to reiterate a lot of the niyamas, but really to continue to always self-study. I mean, truly, we are just a scientist. We're kind of just always collecting more data to truly know ourselves. And so learning to deprogram a lot of these ideas is also a study of the self, because all these programs are the study of the collective consciousness, which is you. You are part of the collective consciousness. So seeing everything from an observation state is truly how you can study yourself in the meditative state. This is where reflection and introspection really become very useful, because sometimes people think of reflection and introspection and they kind of just play out the story multiple times. And while that can help dissolve the karma, the really more beneficial part is when you are in that observation state, when you kind of become non-attached to the story that's being written right in front of you or reflecting right in front of you, and see it from a third person point of view, where you're not in the story entirely, and able to really study the way in which you act, the way you respond, the way you react. This is super important to know yourself, and to know yourself is kind of the name of the game. I mean, we're all God, we're all this one consciousness looking at mirrors to further understand who we are, what we are, why we are. This is kind of just the name of the game. So this is why this self-study is an endless practice and a very essential practice. I mean, you can kind of take a lot of niyamas, a lot of these ideas of niyama with just this one concept. But obviously, you don't want to forego the other fingers of this limb because they're all very beneficial. And so now, the last finger of this second limb is Ishvara Praniyaha, surrender. Probably butchered that one, but surrender is one of the most important concepts that someone can really understand for the spiritual pursuit. When the doer dissolves, only the divine action remains, connection to a higher power. This is kind of what surrender really does for the individual. Logic can bring you so far. You know, it is logic that can unravel a lot of these concepts. You know, it is the double-edged sword of the mind. You know, it is also the mind that creates all these stories, but it's also the mind that can unravel all these stories. This is kind of the beauty of it. But logic only goes so far. You know, once you can get to the edge, to the point of realizing that everything is dual, what makes it so that you have a direct experience of non-duality, of God, of the universe, of unity? And that is surrender. Surrendering is the final step to any sort of realization, any sort of direct experience, any sort of way you want to act in this world is to be in full surrender and full flow and effortless effort with life itself. Surrender cannot be overstated. This is the biggest lesson that you'll continue to learn and deepen throughout your spiritual journey. It is always about surrender. Where are you holding on to concepts, to false beliefs, to control, to attachment, to lack behaviors? Why are you not just surrendering to life? I mean, just look at it. Where in your life has it not given you exactly what you needed at the moment? Every lesson that you've been taught, every decision that you made, the universe, life, just keeps giving you exactly what you need to know yourself better. Every experience has gotten you further to understanding yourself. And so this is where you can really understand that surrendering allows the friction to be joyful, allows all these aspects of your experience to really find that flow state. And this is such a magical experience when you can find that flow state, when you surrender to the universe and you start to dance the dance with life itself and become a co-creator rather than someone getting knocked around in the storm. So now let us go to the third limb of yoga. This is asana, which means seat and is often understood as posture, but it's really a state of being, not just a position. And so really to understand asana, you really have to understand how to get into the proper posture, position, seat is by being steady and comfortable. And this is where you can really find that middle path, that non-attachment state, the seat of awareness. And so asana is really what a lot of people kind of think of when they think of yoga, like hatha yoga, for example, the physical postures and movements. This is a very obviously essential part of the 8 limbs of yoga. It is one of the limbs of yoga. It's just usually kind of twisted by modern society, especially the material paradigm that don't really see through the veil of the physical and don't see that there's things beyond the physical reality. Because asanas are very important. For starter, the body as a yantra, this is a living temple, a circuit of divine electricity. This is the avatar, the antenna. And so the more you learn to use the technology of the body, of the avatar, the more you are able to connect to the divine source. The more you're able to experience more bliss, to experience more flow state, to surrender deeper, to feel more love, etc. This is pretty funny because while on one hand, a lot of people only see yoga as the posture, on the other hand, there's a lot of people that kind of spiritually bypass the body, especially in the mentalist type of thought processes and communities, and even the spiritual communities. they kind of bypass the body, even though it is the body that is truly intelligent. I mean, we really always talk about kind of trying to get away from the mind and really feel in the body, feel in the heart. While, yes, the goal is a heart-mind coherence, but a lot of times people are so disconnected on either side. They're either so mentally there or they don't see beyond the body. And it's really this combination of heart-mind coherence is both. And it's just understanding that this is a geometry. We're playing in this mathematical game. In the code of the matrix, the language of God is through math. And the body is no different. Using the geometries, using these seats, these postures can help align your body and fix the energy to become more open to life itself. This is why it's so important, because this also gets rid of dis-ease. Disease can be, the physical diseases, imbalances of bacteria, fungi, etc., or diseases of the brain, mental ideas like depression, ADHD, all these concepts that are programmed into us. If you really learn to open up the body and get into these certain postures with steadiness and comfortability, then you're really allowing energy to flow, chi to flow effortlessly. This is what true health, the fountain of youth, is all about. This is so many spiritual philosophies and sciences are trying to touch upon is this concept. And so really we can see that like every pose is a mudra for the soul. It's this dialogue with the infinite. And so what this kind of means, every pose is a mudra for the soul, is that you are placing yourself in a geometry so that the antenna of the body can really start to absorb and filter and restructure certain aspects of our body to really align itself with natural law, with the codes of the universe, which is just mathematical, which is just the elements, which is just nature itself. And so one of the important things to understand is that the physical practice of asanas, of hatha yoga, is meant to keep the body healthy and stable for meditation. This is why you often see people doing a lot of hatha yoga practices before they jump into some sort of meditation, like mindfulness meditation, or you're just sitting in corpse position, or you're doing vipassana, etc. This is a very important limb. This is the one that most people think of yoga, but it's so much deeper than just stretching and some type of fitness class with plastic all over the place. And it's a very special one. You do not want to forego it. You do not want to just be stuck in the head. So now let's go to the fourth limb, pranayama, breath control. So if you really look at the translation, prana meaning life force or chi, ayama means expansion or control. It's using the breath as a way to expand our life force energy. If you look at most spiritual traditions across the world, every single one talks about the importance of the breath and how it's the bridge between the physical and the spiritual. This is a very important aspect to yoga, to all understanding of our experience of knowing ourselves and deepening that. And so pranayama is using techniques to control and expand the life force energy within the body. Think of pranayama as breath work. And while this is not necessarily totally wrong, breath work are definitely forms of pranayama to really understand the breath. But there's so many more subtleties to pranayama work and understanding how to move energy in the body, how to move chi and life force in the body. And so really, simply put, an unsteady breath is an unsteady mind. A steady breath is a steady mind. The amount of Western scientific papers we have about the breath, the depths of every tradition talking about the breath, it can't be overstated that the importance of understanding and controlling the breath. I mean, just think about it. The breathing is one of the only things that you can do consciously and unconsciously. It's a very interesting aspect, and it's also a very great representation of the cycle of death and rebirth that is always happening. As you inhale, you are becoming alive, and as you exhale, you are dying. You're always in this constant flow between the two, and this is kind of just the yin and yang nature of reality. And at this deepest stage of pranayama, breath and consciousness are one, as I was explaining with this cycle of rebirth and death. And so now I want to move into the next limb, the fifth limb, where this kind of marks an actual turning point in the path of liberation. So where perception begins to unify. Whereas the first four are very external limbs, we're talking about, while we are doing a lot of internal practices throughout, can't separate those things. I mean, we are doing things like how are we operating in the world? How are we physically moving our bodies? How are we physically breathing? Where the next four are all about more internal and deeper states of meditation. For example, this is kind of where the jhanas in Buddhism really come into play, is once we start at this limb, the fifth limb, pratyahara, sense withdrawal. And so this is kind of the dawn of non-dual perception, where you start to really get a grasp about what non-duality is through a direct experience. So it's really about consciously drawing attention inwards away from the external distraction and sensory inputs. The five senses are seen as illusionary. This is a very important understanding because the five senses are the boundaries of what we distinguish of what's you versus what is me. But once you are able to withdraw from the sensations and understand the limitations that these things are, then you are able to start expanding your awareness beyond the senses themselves. This is where you start to get the sixth sense, the third eye clarity, the psychic abilities, and this non-dual perception. So the subject and object begin to arise in the same fields of awareness. So as we are beginning this non-dual perception, both the subject and the object, the particle and the wave, start to become closer and closer intertwined. And the awakening of the sixth sense happens, like I was saying. This is where you start to really go beyond the veil that is kind of the material paradigm. The sixth limb is dharana, concentration. This is a very important next step after you withdraw your sensations, is learning to get single-pointed concentration. A lot of people and I refer to it as yogic concentration because it's this practice of focusing the mind on a single object, thought, or point. This is not effortful thinking, but effortless being. So the more you try to have this single point concentration, the harder it is to have. But if you simply learn to withdraw from your sensations, so you have no more distractions, you'll see that you always have one single point of concentration. Usually this is practiced through third eye gazing type of practices, or looking at a flame. Really just anything that practices concentration really can help this. So it's really learning just to hold your awareness steady without slipping into distractions. This is going to be probably one of the hardest ones for people to get in the modern age, because your attention and your awareness is kind of just how the money system works nowadays. Everyone is searching for the most potent thing that you have to offer, which is your awareness, your attention. And so this is why we have so much dopaminergic activities like scrolling through the phone, eating fast food, constantly being distracted left, right, and center. And so most people don't have this ability of concentration, are feeling very far out of it because of all these distractions. I mean, we've gotten so far away from this level of concentration and understanding that we've started to kind of make up these mental diseases like ADHD, which is really just not being able to hold your awareness steady because of the environmental distractions that life has to offer. This is what is kind of just programmed in the modern society. So one point of yogic concentration, all energy flows towards a single point. Where you concentrate is where energy flows. This is super important when it comes to working on your energy, moving chi, like pranayama work, and asana work, as well as just anything in life. I mean, if you're trying to manifest your life, if you keep getting constantly distracted by other objects and not keeping your concentration on the truth, on your dharma, on what you want to create, then you will never really pour enough energy to create that dream. And so this is why this is a very important step, a very important limb. This is also stated that when you get to this level of concentration, prana, the life force energy, stabilizes in the Sushumna Nadi. So the higher brain centers begin to synchronize. So this is when Ida and Pingala finally meet at the third eye, and that the Sushumna, the central column of energy, can start to flow upwards, and then the third eye kind of really turns on. You kind of start getting into the true meditative state. And so the seed of meditation begins to bloom once you gain yogic concentration. The line thins between the observer and the observed. Lose the sense of, are you the one acting, or are you just always being acted upon? You start to really see that free will and predeterminism are really just two sides of the same coin, and that line really begins to blur here. So now to the seventh limb, dhyana, meditative. This is a huge one. A lot of times it's often understood as meditation, but I think it's more appropriately translated to meditative, because where in English, meditation is kind of a broad word that doesn't really have too much substance to it. Meditative, the act of meditation, is really more applicable and is more aligned to what dhyana is pointing to, because it's not that you jump into meditation, it's that you act out of meditative states. You are always in constant meditation, whether you're sitting on the mat or you are walking down the street or creating what you want to create, etc. And so dhyana is the state of uninterrupted, effortless concentration and meditative absorption. So this is really when you kind of hit that stride of flow state, when you're actually in the meditative state. The meditator is no longer doing meditation. Meditation happens through them. So there's no more acting, there's no more doing, there's no more effort, but it's just all effortless action. It's all effortless flow. This is that flow state. Is really one of the best metaphors that we have for it. I mean, if you have ever played sports or played an instrument and you've gotten to that flow state, really the mind can't even keep up with it. The thoughts might be following the trend of the flow state, but you're such in a unified field that things are just happening before you can even act or respond or react. It is just all out of pure divine play. And so what's really important once you get into this type of meditative state is understanding that life is the greatest sadhana, the greatest spiritual practice. No longer bound to the cushion, all of life becomes meditation. And so this is really where the fun begins, because you are in a constant state of meditation, and so you're always constantly observing your reality. So you're now able to respond instead of react to a lot of the circumstances that are happening in your world. This is super important when it comes to niyama and yama practices, asana, pranayama, etc., all these practices. And this is when you can really start to unfold a lot of karma and really start co-creating with life, is when you're in meditation. And so in dharana, you can hold the focus. In dhyana, the focus holds you. This is where you kind of really are in that non-doer state, although you still have full control. You're still the doer. So it's just very non-dual experience. So always hard to say in words. And then finally, the final limb is samadhi, enlightenment or absorption. This is the final stage of deep awareness, bringing a sense of ultimate peace and oneness with the universe. To bring together into wholeness, the union of the seer and the seen. This is really the state of non-dual perception. While everything up to this is kind of working up to samadhi in some sort of way, samadhi is really when you are completely absorbed. You know, this is kind of the concept that this is where the mind finally ceases to even think, which is not entirely true, but it is so unified where the doer and non-doer are the same that no words can really ever touch upon this state. I mean, they're always just finger pointing towards what samadhi really is. Also, this is kind of what every spiritual tradition, teaching, practice is aiming for, is this enlightenment, this samadhi state, this complete absorption where you really have that direct experience with a unity consciousness with the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. So even in this state, stillness dissolves. There's no meditator, no object, only pure self-luminous consciousness. This is so beyond words and what everyone is really striving for when they're talking about spiritual pursuit, trying to hit a certain stage. And so furthermore, in the yogic science, you can split up samadhi into further states. I think the easiest ways to understand it, because even at this state, the journey continues. There are three easier ways to understand samadhi. So there's savikalpa samadhi. This is a faint trace of the observer remains. So this is kind of like you're riding the edge of meditation, kind of at that 99% of full absorption, where you can kind of slip into nirvikalpa samadhi, which is the full formless absorption. This is nirvana. This is where you're completely shattered into everything. But savikalpa, you can still kind of function if need be. And then there's also like sahaja samadhi. This is kind of like the natty state, the natural state, where you're fully awake and embodied, living in liberation. This is kind of like Christ consciousness idea. This is kind of just the embodiment state of samadhi. While these three things are all considered under the samadhi, they are distinct in the ways in which they act. You really will understand this the more and more you've jumped into these deeper states of absorption. And so I really want to reiterate, while these 8 limbs can act as a stepping stone to reach samadhi, I think this is a great way to look at it, especially when you look at it from other lenses like the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. It's not always very linear, as you've probably experienced in your spiritual pursuit, as everything's kind of cyclical. And so even when you hit samadhi, you are still working upon all these limbs of yoga. It's really becoming a master of the limbs is really the name of the game. If you can be like an octopus and really be within the body, and like an octopus, think with the whole body, with the whole 8 limbs, is very important. And so you can kind of think of like anytime you have an experience or emotion or whatever, you kind of go through the 8 limbs, you go through all these processes until you get it to complete absorption, complete integration, and complete embodiment to your being. Now, we touched upon this earlier, which is the 4 classical paths of yoga. So the 8 limbs comes from Raja Yoga, the royal path of meditation. This is kind of just using meditation for your way of connecting to unity. And so the 8 limbs is a great framework, a great science to really articulate what the royal path is really about. But there's 3 other classical paths that I want to mention that are very beneficial to getting to these higher states of embodiment. So for example, karma yoga, the path of action. This is selfless service without attachment to the fruits of your labor. So for example, Jesus is a great example of someone who was practicing karma yoga, whether he knew about it or not, is because he was doing so much service out of pure selflessness, out of pure love, out of pure action. And this is also kind of similarly to Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion, where the heart as an altar, love as the offering. And so Jesus is another great example of this. I feel like if you really had to boil down a lot of his teachings as really the karma and Bhakti Yoga paths. Granted, I think he was doing all 4 amazingly. And so really understanding the Bhakti Yoga path, the path of devotion, is kind of what we touched upon earlier with in niyamas about discipline and devotion. Whereas disciplined, you're kind of sometimes acting out of a state of scarcity. When you're devoted, everything is coming out of love. And so you really, once you understand that the underlying aspect behind all of reality is gracefully unconditional love, when you can start to operate from non-duality, which is that unconditional love, then you can start to really start performing and acting in this world with gratitude, with embodiment. And I think this is why Bhakti Yogi is one of the most beautiful paths that you can walk. And then there's Jnana Yoga, the path of wisdom. This is kind of the path of questioning, like, who am I? which is cutting through the illusions to pure awareness. This is sharpening the mind and really breaking down all the false concepts that the mind creates by using the mind. This is kind of like being able to place the ego into its proper place as, a software engineer, or as someone who can also debug a lot of the bugs it created. And why I really wanted to add this to this presentation is because I think all four of these paths of yoga are very essential. I mean, we just went over the royal path of meditation, and you can see, I think, clearly through this great science of the 8 limbs, how this can really benefit anyone's life, how understanding meditation to this level and participating in meditation to this level is going to create so much liberation in one's experience. But I think the same with karma and bhakti yogi and jnana yoga. As in karma yoga, like once you kind of hit samadhi and start to have all these crazy states of meditation, I mean, what is there to do? You finally hit the finish line and then realize there was a starting line. And so then you have to actually start acting in this world, which is karma yoga. And so where can you act where you're not creating more imbalances, more karma entanglement to a negative degree, to a degree where you're attached versus a degree where you're non-attached? You kind of just have to play in this world of karma. That's kind of the whole point of you reincarnating. And so I think karma yoga is a very essential path to understand as well. So with bhakti yoga, the path of devotion is where you lead from the heart, where you really understand that through this rise of consciousness that we're all experiencing from ego self-awareness is to move to Christ consciousness, where everything is leading from unconditional love, understanding that everything is unified, everything is in relationship. And so the path of bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, is a super huge one to really understand, and it's such a beautiful one to really be devoted to life. It's such a special and important aspect of the spiritual path. And then obviously jnana yoga, the path of wisdom, questioning who am I, is another important aspect to this whole spiritual path. I mean, to be able to sharpen the mind and really be able to create discernment and use the wisdom of the mind is very important, because without the balancing of the mind and with the overrunning of the heart, people can take advantage of that pure devoted love, whereas we really want that mind-heart coherence. And so as you're able to dissect all the illusions through the path of jnana yoga, it is very important to also balance it out with the heart, with devotion, with the action. And so really why I'm kind of reiterating all these things is that you kind of want to have the combination of all things. You always want to approach things holistically. So being able to go through all the four paths together will really lead you to the middle path, to the center point. These are all the cardinal directions that lead you to the center. There's a really famous yogic story that kind of emphasizes this, where the Raha Yoga, the Karma Yogi, the Bhakti Yogi, and a Jnana Yogi are all searching for God in the forest. And it's not until they come together does God actually appear. And so this is really just showing that you must approach it from all angles, through the wisdom of the mind, through the questioning, through the philosophizing, as well as through pure devotion, heart opened, purely surrendered, through the actions you take, through non-attachment and doing stuff selflessly, and then through meditation and introspection and really finding presence. Super important and a continuous journey, even if you understand these things. So next, I want to kind of talk about how this relates to other cultures. It's very specifically the ones that I have listed. But you can really understand that yoga is the science of the technology of the body. So anyone who has awakened to life will realize yoga and will realize yoga. This is just because that this is innate in all of us. You're awakening to life. This is not something that you're grabbing from inside out, but it's just realizing that the true nature of your being. And so yoga has been described throughout all traditions, through different ways, etc. And I think some easy ways to really see this is one, through Buddhism. First of all, we know that the Buddha was a yogi. It was described that he was a yogi before he reached Buddhahood, referring to Gautama Buddha. And we can understand this even further when we look at the Eightfold Path, which mirrors the same ethics, concentration, and wisdom arc that the eight limbs of yoga has. And so through the Eightfold Path, which is the Buddhist stepladder to enlightenment, we can kind of see the correlations and similarities between these eight steps to higher consciousness. As well as if you look at the Buddha's jhanas, you'll see so much similarities with dharana, dhyana, and samadhi throughout the jhanas, as this is all talking about these deep states of realizations and meditations. Also, if you look at Jesus' teachings, you can see so many similarities through yamas and niyamas with the Golden Rule, the Ten Commandments, and also just the way in which Jesus acts and really shows his unified state, being a yogi himself. I mean, there's so many theories that Jesus learned yoga during his lost periods in between the age of 12 and 30 that the Bible doesn't really reference. You know, you have stuff like the Dalai Lama saying that there's written records of Jesus there, but there's also, you know, theories that the Library of Alexandria, because we know Jesus went to Egypt, the Library of Alexandria had all records of yoga and so many other spiritual traditions. And so Jesus probably did not only see it within themselves as yoga is something from within, but also probably read a lot of these type of teachings. And then if you look at even more traditions like Taoism and Qigong, you'll really find so many similarities, even to the very similar postures of asanas in yoga and Qigong and movements and pranayama work. And the correlations are so similar between these two technologies and understandings of the bodies. And while I can go on and on about all these cultures, it is super interesting just to see that, you know, like most of spirituality, it is all just coming from within. You know, the kingdom of heaven is within. And so too does that mean the technology of yoga, the understanding of these sciences, and even these frameworks of the eight limbs, while they might not be describing it in this very specific eight limbs way, all of these understandings pop up in very similar circumstances because it's all from the unified field, all from the same source. And so, you know, we have depictions even in Southern America of yoga postures written on temples and cave walls. So it's just all a search within of trying to know thyself, of introspection and true understanding of the selves. Yoga will appear. In fact, that's how they described Adiyogi, the first yogi to even find out all this information, is when he got into samadhi, when he unified himself with existence, did all this come through. And so lastly, I just want to talk about integration, because it's really amazing to understand and conceptualize all these ideas, but really the integrate it and embody it is the main aspect to why we want to understand these things. And so really understanding that every relationship, every breath, every emotion is raw material for the eight limbs. And what I mean by that is that every experience that you are having, we must meditate through each eight limbs on that experience. Kind of very cyclical, that we're trying to bring everything up into absorption, into that non-attachment, into the pure presence. And so we can really look at yama and niyama to refine that friction, asana and pranayama to refine the body, pratyahara through samadhi refine the awareness itself. These are modalities that you're going to constantly be juggling, and is that role that this framework is so great at, is that you can just deepen these understandings through more life experiences, and this really helps you stay in meditation and really unify yourself further and further. And so really, to reiterate, the ladder is never climbed once, it's climbed again in every experience for the rest of your life. So you're just constantly refining and getting deeper into deeper states of samadhi, deeper states of union with your life, with your experience, especially through the 8 limbs of yoga. And so really mastery isn't a rival, it's the depth of your practice. I think this is a huge one that I think a lot of people don't truly understand. A lot of times people put masters on a pedestal, but really what a master is someone who is devoted and deep into their practices. Yes, that might come through time, but someone who is so intentional and deep with their practice is a master in that regard. And so, time isn't even real. And so what does it really mean to be a master is really someone who is walking the walk, truly. I think this is another good yogic example of this is that if you look at stuff like chakra swara, someone who's mastered the chakras, that is a title given to someone who is working on mastering the chakras. Even though the title is mastery over the chakras, you don't really gain that unless you are working towards it. That's it for today's video. Like, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, or topics you want me to talk about. Until next time, peace.